Back on Monday, we went over the most important games on Tennessee's football schedule for 2022. Now, today, it's the toughest football games on Tennessee's schedule. Very similar shows, but now the rankings 12 all the way down to 1 goes off the opponents and the challenges that face Tennessee and picking up that W. Stay tuned here for a Thursday Locked On Vols.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody, and welcome into it. This is Locked On Vols, and of course, it is your team every single day. I'm your host, Eric Kane, and I'm so glad to have you guys along for the ride here on this Thursday. And it's your team every single day. That's Locked On Podcast Network. And of course, this is Locked On Vols, your first listen. Finding us wherever you find your podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, subscribing, following, and commenting whenever you can. Really do appreciate that. As I said in the cold open, today, toughest football games on the schedule. We're breaking it down into 3 different segments. Segment 1, 12 through 8. Segment 2, 7 through 4, and then the top 3 toughest games on Tennessee's schedule. I bet you can guess 2 of those coming up later in segment number 3. If you're new to the show, welcome to it. So glad you guys are here. I'm Eric Kane. I do radio in Knoxville, Tennessee at 99.1 thesportsanimal.com. I write for the rival side that covers the University of Tennessee. That is volquest.com. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. This is your Thursday edition of Locked On Vols, the toughest football games on the schedule for the University of Tennessee. So again, especially in segment 1, it's going to be very mirror-like episodes in terms of most important games and toughest games, because in terms of the most important games, those easier games, those 3 non-conference games, those out-of-conference games, not at the Power 5 level, they're obviously not very important because they're obviously not going to be very tough teams according to, or, in relation to the University of Tennessee. So very close in terms of segments 1 from Monday and segment 1 here today, but it'll get a little different as we go on. So real quick in review, what I had on Monday's show in terms of the most important football games in 2022, 12 all the way down to 1, Akron, UT Martin, Ball State, at Vanderbilt, Missouri, Alabama, at Georgia, at South Carolina, at LSU, at Pitt, Kentucky, and Florida. That's how I rated Tennessee's games in terms of most importance on the schedule for 2022. Now, in terms of the toughest football games for 2022, let's go ahead and start. And again, just like where we started last week or on Monday, it will be the Akron Zips. Akron comes in week number 3, coming off a 2-10 record in 2021, 1-7 in the Mid-Atlantic Conference. Joe Moorhead, gosh, I can't even read my own writing. Joe Moorhead, formerly, again, like I said, at Mississippi State, formerly the offensive coordinator at Penn State. He is now the head coach of Akron, and they've had 6 straight losing seasons. So I'm not breaking any records here to say that probably the easiest game for Tennessee in 2021 is going to be Akron, and that's going to come in week 3. Of course, Tennessee plays Ball State at home, hits the road at Pitt for week 2, and then we'll come back home, and that game's going to be on the streaming device. A lot of you guys, by the way, sidebar, a lot of you guys ask, how I stream, what do I have? I used to have YouTube TV, and I really liked it. Unlimited DVR, big fan of YouTube TV. I switched because at the time, YouTube TV carried Sinclair Sports, which carried the Fox Sports Southeast, South Regional Networks, and I could watch my Braves. When they got in a dispute, I hopped over to Hulu Live, and Hulu Live ended up dropping that as well. So I went ahead and stayed with Hulu Live. That's what I have right now, but I've got Prime, I've got HBO Max, I've got Netflix, of course, which I should drop it. It sucks. I've got a couple of different other ones as well. So a lot of you guys were asking about streaming, and that just kind of made me reminded me of that right there. I thought I'd tell you. But number 12, it will be the Akron Zips, in my opinion. Moving on to the 11th toughest game on UT's schedule in 2022. And I'm going to say it's UT Martin. UT Martin, that's going to be in week 8. It is not the homecoming game. I figured that out earlier this week. But UT Martin coming off a 9-2 record in 2021. Of course, Jason Simpson is the head coach, and they hail from the Ohio Valley Conference. And UT Martin is looking at 3 straight. It is kind of the primer before you have 3 straight SEC games in Florida, LSU, and Alabama. So it's going to get interesting there. Nope, that's actually incorrect. That would be Akron, the game I just spoke on. That is the primer before you get into 3 straight SEC games. UT Martin comes later on in the season, but nonetheless, they're 9-2. They're pretty decent football team at their level, but when we're talking about the University of Tennessee, that this honestly it shouldn't be a contest. Tennessee's played UT Martin a couple times over the last couple of years. Back in 2012, I believe Tennessee put up like nearly 50 points on UT Martin, and now going to play them again here in 2022, 10 years later. So no Cordell Patterson, no Tyler Bray on this football team, but you got to have Hendon Hooker and you have Cedric Tillman, so it should be pretty easy running there. So least toughest game, or easiest game if you want to call it, at number 12 was Akron. At number 11 was UT Martin. And now we go on down to number 10, and that is going to be the season opener in Ball State. Ball State's week 1, that Thursday night, September the 1st, 7 o'clock 7 o'clock kick. And that's when we get this whole thing going. 2020 surprise MAC champions. Disappointing season in 2021 when they finished 6-7. Head coach is Mike No, and this is his this is a 7th season, and he's looking for a 3rd straight bowl game for Ball State. I don't think this is a Ball State team from a couple years ago that were pretty good. What was it? Gosh, they went like 10-0 or 11-1 one year in recent memory. Maybe I'm off a few years, but I don't think it was in the last 5 years or whatever. But this is not that same Ball State team. This Ball State team is coming to Neyland Stadium, not off a horrible year, but obviously that bowl lost a little sour taste in their mouth, but an under 500 record. And, Tennessee should do what it does in opening games and should have just, no issue at all. So at 12 is Akron, 11 is UT Martin, 10 is Ball State. Let's get into some actual games that we kind of care about here. And it's funny, I say that because a lot of you guys do not care about this next team. I'm going to say at number 9, it is going to be Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt is in week 13 of the season, the conclusion to the regular season for the Volunteers. The in-state foes, the little brothers from Nashville, whatever you guys want to coin it, whatever you guys want to call them. Vanderbilt is everything, the definition of a rebuild yet again. Second year for Clark Lee. I am not a fan of Clark Lee, the head coach. I do not think that there are some head coaches that try to be head coaches that are just better coordinators, and I think Clark Lee is certainly that. I can't remember if I told this story in a recent episode or even if I told this story on Monday. So again, if I did, I'm sorry. I've done about 20 shows since Monday. But when I was at SEC Media Days in Hoover last year, not in Atlanta this past summer, but in Hoover last year, and some of these Vanderbilt players get up there and say, "Yeah, we really respect," and obviously they're going to talk about their program. They wouldn't be at SEC Media Days if they weren't. But yeah, we love Coach Lee. He's doing this, he's doing that. He made us earn our jersey. He made us earn our locker rooms. He made us earn everything we get in the Vanderbilt program. And I'm like, what is this? Is this Pee Wee football? No, you're given a locker, you're given a jersey. You don't have to earn crap. You go out there and you get better. Like, stop fooling around. And so ever since then, I'm like, I don't necessarily think this Clark Lee guy's going to make it. And of course, he lost to ETSU last year, and oh boy, he did get a couple of wins. Let's see, what he can do this year. But Mike Wright, I like the quarterback, but not a whole lot of playmakers on that roster. So, least toughest SEC football game, bar none, is Vanderbilt. And that leads us here to the final one in segment number 1. We'll go into number 8, and that is going to be the Missouri Tigers. And if you're watching on YouTube, obviously I messed up my graphic right there. That should be a open parenthesis type situation, but nonetheless, ignore it. The Missouri Tigers. Actually, Eli Drinkwitz named Brady Cook his starting quarterback. Brady Cook started one game last year, and it was the Armed Forces Bowl whenever Missouri lost to Air Force. But trying to take over, filling the shoes of Connor Bazelak. Obviously, there was some talent on that roster last year, All-American and Tyler Beatty. They had a couple other players along with Connor Bazelak at quarterback, but those guys are gone. Beatty's now in the NFL. Bazelak he transferred somewhere. Is he at Indiana? I don't necessarily remember, but no longer in the program is Connor Bazelak. And I just think from a lack of a talent on that roster, it's not going to be much of a game for Tennessee. But again, it's later on in the season, so we'll have to take a pulse of the injury top situations, before then and all that, because every football team changes as the season goes on, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. Look at Tennessee in 2019. You lose to Georgia State. You'll lose a close one to BYU, and then you go on that, really good run there to end the season. Look at Florida and Auburn last year. At least Florida starting out kind of hot, then you just kind of limp to the finish line. So any way you want to spin it, teams can be different, but I just don't think there's a lot of talent on that roster for Missouri right now. So in terms of toughest games, you have Akron, UT Martin, Ball State, Vanderbilt, and Missouri. And that's kind of where we break here. I know that when we get into it, it's going to get a little bit more enticing. So stay tuned. Segment 2, we're going to go down teams 7 through 4 in the toughest game category for the University of Tennessee. That is coming up next here on Locked on Vols. But first, if you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you're truly depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And guess what? There's a new flavor. Are you ready? Delicious, indulgent cookie dough. Cookies covered in chocolate. That's right. Built has done it once again. Let me introduce you to the new favorite, cookie dough chunk puffs. They have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. Cookie dough chunk puffs are only 160 calories. They have a whopping 15 grams of protein in them as well. So go ahead and run to Built.com, snag a box for you and the family. It'll be the perfect treat. Or you can find a really good hiding place and just hoard them all for yourself. Like all Built bars, the new cookie dough chunk puff is covered in 100% real chocolate. That means they're healthy and tasty. Chocolate covered cookie dough with a light, fluffy texture. So good, so delicious. Go to Built.com and use that promo code LOCK15, and you're going to get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off. That is all at Built.com. We welcome you back in here to this Thursday edition of Locked on Vols. The topic here for today's show, toughest games, ranking each game on the 2022 football schedule for the University of Tennessee and levels of toughness. Not importance. We did that on Monday, but levels of toughest to beat. So far in segment 1, we've gone from 12 in descending order, where we've done Akron at 12, UT Martin at 11, Ball State at 10, Vanderbilt at 9, and Missouri at 8. Now, let's kick off that little middle portion of the toughest games on the schedule. All these but one are SEC opponents, and obviously, by process of elimination, you can guess what the other one is, but you knew it kind of fall into this category. At number 7, we will go South Carolina. South Carolina, a lot of love in the offseason. I'm in the I'm in the I got to see it consistently to believe it category in terms of all these transfers. Spencer Rattler will not be as bad as he was. Spencer Rattler is already not as bad as he is, as bad as his reputation kind of precedes him. But you're going to be going up against some stout defenses every single week in the Southeastern Conference. This is not Big 12 football. This is SEC football. How are you going to respond week in and week out, drive in and drive out when you get knocked down, when you throw an interception? I'm very much intrigued to see Spencer Rattler this year in the Southeastern Conference. But they've added a ton to that roster. He's recruiting Shane Beamer at a pretty high clip, and for South Carolina standards, and Shane Beamer exceeded expectations in year 1. This is potentially a tough game for the University of Tennessee because it is late in the season. It's going to be on week 12, right before the Vanderbilt game, and it's on the road. Tennessee, in a place you're going to go and you're going to you're going to see some wacky fans. Some of the best in SEC football, of course, in terms of home field advantage. I'm not saying it's the best home field advantage in the SEC, but it's a good environment. Is what I'm trying to say, and it's going to be late in the year. This is a team that, if it stays healthy, it can get some teams later on the year. I truly, truly do believe that. So that's on the radar for the University of Tennessee. But everything equal, Tennessee should beat this team by 2 touchdowns, in my opinion. So South Carolina was picked to finish 5th in the SEC East this year. We'll have to see exactly what that season looks like. But in my opinion, the Week 12 game on the calendar for the University of Tennessee, the South Carolina Gamecocks, is the 7th toughest game on the schedule for the Tennessee Volunteers. We move on now to 6th. Let's dip out of the Southeastern Conference. Let's go to the ACC. Week 2. We know this is a very, very tough game. In fact, the Pitt game was number 3 on my most important games of the 2022 season for the University of Tennessee, but now it's coming in at number 6 in terms of toughest. Can Pitt beat Tennessee? Yes. In my opinion, every team from 7 down can beat Tennessee. I don't think Missouri can beat Tennessee. I don't think Vanderbilt can beat Tennessee. And we know that Ball State, UT Martin, and Akron can't beat Tennessee. Can Pitt beat Tennessee? Absolutely it can. It's got a lot returning in the front 7. Pat Narduzzi is a defensive-minded head coach that typically gets good play out of his front 7. You don't have Matt Corral anymore. Just kidding. That's Ole Miss. You don't have Kenny Pickett anymore, but you do bring in Keaton Slovis of USC. We'll have to see exactly how he adjusts and what he looks like at this, over here in the ACC. But there's going to be a drop-off. I mean, Kenny Pickett was one of the best quarterbacks in college football last year. There will be a drop-off. Oh, yeah. And the most explosive playmaking, wide receiver in college football there from last year is no longer there. So we know who's not there anymore, but it's still going to be a challenge. I mentioned Keaton Slovis is not Kenny Pickett, but he can go and he can play some football for you. They return a couple on the offensive line. They return a lot in the front seven. It's going to be a hard-nosed football team that I think if they play to the best of their abilities and Tennessee does not turn the football over and beat itself, it's a team that'll lose by 11 points to Tennessee in week 2, and it'll be a pretty good showing. As I said on Monday, as I said countless times, this is a game in year number 2 where Tennessee needs to go up there and just win. Tennessee's got to win this game. It's not a must win if you lose this game. Josh Heupel's not on the hot seat or anything like that, but you've got to go and win this football game. So intrigued to see exactly how that game's going to unfold. And it's very early. A lot of things will be unsettled. But week 2 of the season, Pitt at number 6 on my list for toughest football games for the University of Tennessee. Let's move on now to number 5, and that is down in the Bayou. All right. That is LSU, week 6. Huge matchup in LSU. I think for LSU, there's talent on that roster. And what I mean by that is there's talent on that roster because they've got some different options at the quarterback position. I was talking about LSU the other day, and I said Max Johnson. I meant Miles Brennan. I know Max Johnson is no longer with the program, but Miles Brennan. You've got Jaden Daniels. You got Miles Brennan. You've got a couple of their options there at the talent position, at the quarterback position that has a lot of talent. You got Keyshawn Boutte at wide receiver. LSU's always got some athletes. LSU's got some depth. LSU is a team that, though rebuilding, now has a head coach that knows how to press all the right buttons. LSU will not be rebuilding for long. I truly don't believe that. But playing at home, especially if that's a night game, I don't think it will be. But if that is a night game, that's going to be tough. Why do I not think that's a night game? Well, because Alabama and Texas A&M have their matchup that week as well. So you want to be that. You want to put that into prime time. But LSU, I think, is just a tough place to play. And I think that there is talent on that roster. And for those reasons, Keyshawn Boutte might have, a 200-yard game potentially. So Tennessee's defense, the secondary, the cornerbacks, the safeties, Wesley Walker, Tamari McDonald, whoever's playing the star position, have got to be ready to shut down one of the best wide receivers they will see all season long, maybe the best wide receiver that they're going to see all season long. But because of the location, the talent that's still on that roster, despite the losing season last year, a new head coach, and the environment, LSU comes in at number 5 on my list of toughest games for the University of Tennessee in 2022. Now, let's get down to the final one here in segment 2 before we hit the top 3 toughest games for Tennessee in 2022. At number 4, there's going to be some debate here, but let's go ahead and rule it out. Number 4 is Florida. A lot of people want Florida higher on this list because, one of my good buddies who listens to the show every single day, appreciate you, Matthew, for hanging out with us, says that it needs to be up there at number 2. Well, maybe not number 2. Maybe he said number 3. I mean, Alabama and Georgia are self-explanatory, but just because of the mind, just the mind games. Tennessee cannot get over the hump, it seems like, for Florida. Florida, as I mentioned in Monday's episode, let's see here, they've won 16 of the past 17 games. Tennessee got that win in 2016, but before that, gosh, it was all the way back in the mid-2000s. It has been a minute since Tennessee's found success against Florida. But Florida, from a talent perspective, does not hold a candle to what Tennessee has this year, in my opinion. Is it as bad as everybody's making it out to be? No, I don't believe that's the case. But again, there's no excuse for Tennessee not to beat Florida this year, especially with that game at home. Rebuilding, first year in a new system, first year with a new head coach, trying to figure out its different personnel. You have a good quarterback in Anthony Richardson. I get all that. But look at the counter. Look what Tennessee's going to be countering with. More bodies on the defense side of the football, more guys to rotate in and play in the secondary, more options in the front 7, potentially. You counter that on offense with established quarterback, established receiver, established offensive line for the most parts, and some experience at the running back position with Jabari Small and Jalen Wright. And who knows, who could be getting some touches by then. That's going to be week 5 of the season or week 4 of the season against Florida. Florida probably does deserve to be in the top 3 here just because of the rivalry and just because Tennessee can't get over that hump. We talk about, we make fun of, as a fan base, Tennessee fans make fun of Kentucky. Yeah, best seasons in program history, still can't beat the Vols. Well, that's the case for Tennessee and Florida. I mean, it's just something to where you can't get over that hurdle. Tennessee better beat Florida this year. Talking about winning, against the big 3. When can you take that step? A great opportunity in 2022 is to beat Florida, and that is the fourth toughest game on the schedule, in my opinion, for Tennessee this fall. All right, who is in that top three? Well, process of elimination, you know that there are three teams that haven't spoke on just yet, and really, if you think about it, you know what order they're going to come in. But the suspense, let's hold it. We'll get back in here. We'll finish up this episode here in segment number 3, the top 3 toughest opponents for the University of Tennessee in 2022. Coming up next, right here on Locked On Vols. Just a couple minutes left here on this edition of Locked On Vols. Welcome back into it, guys. I am Eric Kane, and we are ranking Tennessee's opponents for this upcoming season in terms of toughest games to win. So far, 12 down in descending order. 12 is Akron, 11 is UT Martin, 10 is Ball State, 9 is at Vanderbilt, 8 is Missouri, 7 is South Carolina, at South Carolina, 6 is at Pitt, 5 is at LSU, 4 is against Florida, and now we get into number 3. That third team on the schedule, or in my rankings here, coming in at number 3 in terms of Tennessee's toughest game, third toughest game on the schedule is going to be Kentucky. Just kind of talked about Kentucky and how Tennessee fans view Kentucky. What I talked about on Monday, ignore the logo, know the team behind it. A solid football team that's great at the line of scrimmage, that's got an athletic quarterback that will be playing in the NFL, that's got a good running back in Chris Rodriguez, that's got an all-American caliber linebacker in Square. There's a whole lot of talent on this roster. They are not flashy. They will not go run up the scoreboard. They will not spread it out for the most part and throw it all over the yard. They did against Tennessee last year, and that's why I was just kind of shocked sitting there at halftime whenever Will Levis averaged he had already surpassed his season average in throws per game at halftime against Tennessee last year. But still, to no cigar, Tennessee was able to make that stop at the very, very end and preserve the victory. But Kentucky is an important game. Sporting news, we talked about it on Wednesday's starting lineup on 99.1 The Sports Animal. Sporting news ranked Tennessee and Georgia as the second most important game of the SEC schedule. And I kind of look at that and I'm like, well, Georgia's going to beat Tennessee, in my opinion, this year. I value Tennessee against Kentucky much, much more because, again, you don't want to play for silver, but the winner against Tennessee and Kentucky will likely finish second in the SEC at that point in time. Now, maybe Tennessee and or Kentucky stubs their toes somewhere else along the way. That's football. But the winner against Kentucky will likely finish second in the SEC East behind Georgia. Tennessee and Kentucky have been close games here of late. I know 2020 was a different story. Kentucky ran out of here at Neyland Stadium for the first time, first win since the 1980s. I understand all that. But typically they're close, physical football games. It's a rivalry game. It's the border. It's the battle of the border, right? The battle of the beer barrel. So it's going to be a tough and a physical football game, but I think Tennessee matches up so well against Kentucky, and I think it's a nightmarish matchup. If I'm Kentucky, I'm sitting there in that locker room trying to game plan against Tennessee. Up-tempo, speed, beat them vertically, beat them over the top, and then gash them with the run with those vertical run lanes. That's how Tennessee can beat Kentucky. All right, that brings us to the top 2 games on the schedule in terms of toughness. Number 2 is going to be Georgia by process of elimination. You know who's left. We'll get to that in just one moment. Georgia, in between the hedges, week 10. Georgia is one of 2 football games that's on the schedule to where I don't think Tennessee will win this year. In other words, I believe Tennessee can win every game on the schedule. Will they? No, but can win every game on the schedule except 2, and that's Georgia and Alabama. Will they? Likely not. That's not how football works. But Georgia, though it lost tons off that generational defense from 2021, they bring back so much more. They bring back so much. Great linebacking core, still a really, really good interior defensive line. They bring back a lot on the offensive line. They bring back a lot in the running backfield, and they bring back Stetson Bennett, who is probably, because of people like me, they never value him. They always say that he is overrated. They always say that he shouldn't have that job. But Stetson Bennett started for 2 years, and he's coming off a national championship where he won that national championship by beating Alabama by showing out. Now, in the SEC championship game, he did not. He looked like the guy that we all talk about him to be, but he rose to the occasion, performed well, and really played well in the playoff game. They return a lot. They've got depth. I just think, especially at this point in the season when it's week 10, Tennessee's depth is not comparable to Georgia's depth. Georgia's depth is the result of, top recruiting classes for a couple straight years, top 3 recruiting classes for the last 7 or 8 years. It's different. It just kind of is what it is. Georgia is where Tennessee strives to be here in the next few years in terms of building the roster, in terms of adding players via the transfer portal, as of recruiting blue chippers, having a great blue chip to prospect ratio in each recruiting class. That's where Tennessee's trying to get in the next couple of years. So Georgia comes in at number 2. And then, of course, you know what that means. The third Saturday in October, Alabama week. The Crimson Tide come in at number 1 as being Tennessee's toughest opponent in 2022. Not breaking any news here. Alabama, for it to be a rebuilding year last year, boy, was it good playing in that national championship game. You had the Heisman Trophy winner and Bryce Young at quarterback, best player in the country, in my opinion, Will Anderson Jr. on the other side. You got incoming wide receivers yet again to this offseason. You got returners on the offensive line. You added Jahmyr Gibbs, who's a really, really good all-purpose type back. You got Jordan Battle in the defensive secondary. I mean, I could go on and on and on. So people don't like, when I do this, especially talking about Alabama. They said this is Locked On Vols, not Locked On Bama. It is what it is, though. Know your opponent. Know your enemy, right? In my job, it's my job to know the other team's roster. And, of course, Alabama, where you just can't escape it. They're everywhere. Every time you turn on the TV, it's showing Alabama this, Alabama that. It's not hard to know that schedule, or that roster. But they're also really good football players. And no doubt about it, Alabama's going to be a tough opponent this year, and Alabama's likely going to win the SEC and go to the college football playoff and be a favorite. It is the favorite to win the national championship. They're going to be voted number 1 in the AP poll, and that comes out in a little bit. They were voted number 1 in the coaches poll. They came out earlier this week. So no surprise. Don't even have to elaborate on that. Alabama, the Crimson Tide, is Tennessee's toughest opponent for the 2022 season. So in review, Tennessee's toughest games in 2022, descending order, starting at 12 all the way down to 1. Number 12, Akron. 11, UT Martin. 10, Ball State. 9 at Vanderbilt. 8, Missouri. 7 at South Carolina. 6 at Pitt. 5 at LSU. 4, Florida. 3, Kentucky. 2 at Georgia. And number 1 is Alabama. If you like this show but want to know the most important football games for Tennessee, it's different. Not the toughest, but the most important football games for 2022. Go back a couple of days, find Monday's episode, Tennessee's most important games for the 2022 season, and check out that episode there. Thank you guys so much for allowing me to get away from fall camp a little bit, talk about something different. We'll come back with more notes from practice here on a Friday morning, and Tennessee's gearing up for scrimmage number 2 of the fall camp period. That'll be on Sunday morning, so plenty of coverage throughout the weekend, and of course coming up on Monday. Still hoping to bring an important guest on to conclude a week's worth of shows. That's coming up tomorrow, so stay tuned. Be sure to check back into Friday's Locked On Vols. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vols your first listen every single day. Locked On Vols, your go-to podcast for the Tennessee Volunteers action each and every day, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Make Locked On SEC your second listen, right behind Locked On Vols, which is your first listen each and every day. Please subscribe, rate, review, comment, throw me a like, thumbs up, interact with me on the YouTube channel. The goal is to get 3,000 subscribers by football season. We are closing in on a couple hundred. And, of course, we want to exit football season with 5,000 subscribers. So appreciate you guys and everything you do to help grow this podcast. All right, for the final time here on a Thursday, I am Eric Kane. Appreciate you guys for hanging out with me here today. Let's do it again. Same time, same place tomorrow. Until then, enjoy the rest of your Thursday, everybody.